Welcome to the Word Room. Jesus Revolution just exceeded what they expected in the box office and came in third in its opening weekend in the box office, shattering the expectation and more than doubling what they anticipated. My wife and I actually were able to go see the movie, and I'm here to break down a review of the movie, talk about some of the key things in the movie, and pull out some biblical insights from the movie. If you haven't seen it yet, we're going to do a spoiler-free section, and then I'm going to talk about my favorite scenes at the end, and I'll give you a spoiler warning at that point. Let's go. So I think this movie was a great movie. If you haven't had a chance to see it, I highly encourage you, go see it in the theater. Support the movie, support Christian content. I think it's very important for Hollywood and the movie industry to actually see that there is an audience for Christian content. So go see it. As far as Christian content, this ranks up there. It's not one of those cheesy movies that gets put out as a Christian movie. This is actually really well done. The production quality is great. The acting is amazing. Kelsey Grammer, who plays Pastor Chuck Smith in this movie, incredible. Just the whole thing, all the way around, production value. This was a great, well done movie. So from a movie standpoint, from just a production standpoint, this is a great movie. But really, it's the content of the movie that makes this movie so good. This obviously is a movie targeting a certain demographic. This is targeting people of faith. And so if you are a person of faith and you go see this movie, you're really going to enjoy it. This is targeting that demographic, and it is done really, really well. So if you don't know anything about the movie, Jesus Revolution is a movie that is based on a book written by Greg Laurie about his experience in getting saved and his experience in the Jesus People movement that happened in the late 60s and early 70s, and really had its impact even into the 1980s before the movement officially faded. Yet the fruit of that movement still around today. So I'm going to read the synopsis real quick, talking about what the movie's really about. So if you haven't seen it, nothing I'm going to say at this moment is a spoiler. These are things that you can read in the official synopsis of the movie, things you can get from the trailer. But basically, at the late 1960s, 1970s, Greg Laurie, who is, and at that time, a young teenager, he's living without a father. His mom is addicted. He doesn't have a great home life, and he ends up joining in with the hippies, which was the big movement of that time, that countercultural, anti-establishment movement of the 60s and 70s. And he joins in with the hippies. He starts doing drugs, trips out on acid and LSD and other types of drugs. And he falls in with that group in California, the hippies. But he has an encounter with a charismatic street preacher who happens to be a hippie who God has saved, as well as a pastor who is a pastor of a church called Calvary Chapel, who opens his doors to the hippies, and they all come in. And ultimately, this is about Greg Laurie encountering Jesus. This movie has really three main characters and then a lot of supporting characters and other characters involved. But the three main characters are Chuck Smith, Pastor Chuck Smith, who was the pastor of a church called Calvary Chapel in California. And he is played by Kelsey Grammer in this movie. There is also another man named Lonnie Frisbee, who was a hippie who encountered Jesus. Now, it doesn't talk about it in the movie, but in real life, Lonnie Frisbee encountered Jesus while on an acid trip. He actually had some encounters with God where God was trying to get his attention. He wasn't fully saved. He just knew he had some encounters with God. He ends up encountering another group of people in real life who teach him about Jesus and lead him to the Lord. He gets saved, and then he starts preaching Jesus. He finds what he was always looking for in the drugs and everything else. He finds Jesus, quits the drugs, goes and follows Jesus, and ends up meeting Chuck Smith. And the third main character of this movie is Greg Laurie, who at the time of this movie was a teenager, and he was involved with the hippies. He had fallen in with the hippie movement, doing the drugs, but he encounters God through Lonnie Frisbee and Chuck Smith. And this movie is really about his salvation experiences. It's really his story. Now, the first part of the movie, you may not realize that, the first part of the movie focuses in on Chuck Smith and Lonnie Frisbee. But the last part of the movie focuses in on Greg Laurie, and it's really his story. It's just using Chuck Smith and Lonnie Frisbee as the avenue that ultimately brought Laurie into the kingdom. This is all based on a true story. The term Jesus Revolution actually was coined by Time magazine in 1971. On June 21st, 1971, they released an article in their magazine with a full cover about the Jesus People movement. The Jesus People movement, the people involved were generally termed Jesus freaks, but Time magazine labeled this Jesus Revolution, and that's the cover of that magazine. I've actually put a link down in the description below for the article. You can actually read the article. I highly encourage you read it. It's a very interesting article that kind of gives context to what was happening at that time from someone in that time. So rather than just reading about it afterwards, what were they saying about it then? It's very eye-opening, kind of gives some details on what was actually happening. So I highly encourage you, click that link below and read it. This movie breaks down that story. Now, you can really view the movie in 3 acts. In the first act, you see Chuck Smith and his church and him trying to understand the hippies and understand what's going on, and he's struggling with his church. He encounters Lonnie Frisbee, and in encountering Lonnie Frisbee, he really opens his heart to the hippies, and that's kind of the first section of this movie. The second act really involves the start of the Jesus People movement. It talks about Chuck Smith and Calvary Chapel and Lonnie Frisbee preaching and kind of people starting to get saved, and the movement of hippies turning to Jesus. And then the last part of this, the third act, would be focusing in on Greg Laurie and his life and how he came to Jesus in the midst of this, and his girlfriend who becomes his wife, Kathy, and how all of them get saved, and ultimately how Greg Laurie goes on from there to become a pastor. Now, Greg Laurie actually is currently the pastor of a church in California, one of the largest churches in America, and God is moving there. He also is an evangelist who preaches at crusades, and so Greg Laurie is still in ministry to this day, and this movie is really his story. Now, I think this movie was a fantastic movie. Like I said, really well done. There are a few things out of it that are very, very important that I think we need to address. One of them I'm going to talk about right now in the spoiler-free section, and then we'll talk about spoilers after that. So the main takeaway that jumped out at me was Chuck Smith's willingness and heart to open himself up to the people who were rejected in society, the people that society looked at as the rebels, and the people who they looked at as these are the ones running around, these are the ones doing terrible things, these are the sinners, the outcasts. And he opened his heart to them. He opened his church to them. As a matter of fact, and you can see this is in one of the trailers, so this is not a spoiler, but there's a scene where Chuck Smith is battling the idea of allowing these hippies into his church, but also the people stuck in their ways who didn't want to allow the hippies to come in. They didn't want the change. They were stuck in their ways. And Chuck Smith says, look, the door is open. And he tells the hippies, the door is open to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You have a home here. The door is open to you. And he said, if anyone has a problem with that, well, the door is open to you as well. The door goes both ways. And that willingness to say, this is a generation that needs God, and I'm not going to turn my back on them, no matter how uncomfortable it makes me, no matter how different it may be, no matter how far from God they may be, no matter how much I don't understand about them. They need Jesus, and I'm not going to turn my back on them. That heart is what birthed a movement. And I think this is the important thing in our culture. We need to be willing to be uncomfortable. We need to be willing to love the unlovable. We need to be willing to love those who are stuck in sin, who are not perfect, who don't have it all together, who are the outcasts, because that's who Jesus loved. That's who Jesus came for. If you read the Gospels, you see it over and over and over. Jesus was labeled a friend of sinners, right? Jesus would have dinner with tax collectors and sinners and prostitutes, and he would have dinner and be around these people. He would open himself up to these people, the people that society would reject. And when the people would come and say, "How dare you eat with sinners?" Jesus would say things like, "It's not the healthy that need a doctor, it's the sick," right? Jesus reaches out and loves the unlovable. It's the very nature of grace. It's the very nature of who God is. And many times in the church, we have not done that. And this might step on some toes, but do you want to know who the group is today? It's not the hippies today, not the drug addicts, although some churches probably struggle with that. But by and large, it's not the drug addicts. It's people who are LGBTQ. It's people who are gay. It's people who are trans. It's people who are in that life, and it's simply that they don't know who they really are. And this is the key. I think this is the key I saw in the movie. These people who were struggling and addicted to drugs and struggling with addiction and this whole sexual revolution and everything that was happening in the hippie movement. It's even pointed out in the movie. They're just people looking for truth. They're looking for fulfillment. They're looking for love. They're looking for community. And guess what? Most people, that's the same thing that we all are looking for. Some were looking for that in drugs and in the sexual revolution. There's people today looking for that, and they're finding that community and that acceptance and that love in all the wrong places. They're looking for all the right things in all the wrong places. It's one of the quotes from the movie. And again, this is in the trailer, so this is not a spoiler. There's a line in the movie that is extremely important for us to grasp, to understand. Lonnie Frisbee is talking to Chuck Smith, and he says, "My people," talking about the hippies, he said, "My people, we can only walk through doors that are open to us." And he said, "In your church, that's a door that's closed." That statement should break our hearts. There are people who God loves, who he died for, who he shed his blood for, who he went to the cross for. And the church has shut the door to an entire group of people. It breaks my heart. Now, this does not mean that we cheapen the message. We don't say, just like in the Jesus People movement, we don't say it's okay to stay in your sin. It's okay to keep doing drugs. It's okay to do this or that. No, we don't say that. But we also don't look at them and say, because you're addicted or because you have these desires that within you, your flesh is crying out for the drug, that we just reject you. No, just like we look at someone who struggles with same-sex attraction or in their mind believes they are the wrong gender or has an issue in their mind, we don't look at them and say, just because you have these desires or just because you have this inward battle raging within you, we don't reject you. Yes, the acting upon that and homosexual activity and those acts are sin, but we don't reject you. And I think this is a big problem in the church. The reason we aren't reaching people in that community, the reason we aren't reaching those people is because we have shut the door to them. We want them to change and then come join us. And God said, no, that's not how he does it. God doesn't require you to change first. He simply requires you to turn your heart to him, to give your heart to him. There may be people who struggle with same-sex attraction, but they've given their heart to Jesus and they're trusting Jesus with their heart and they're rejecting those feelings within them and they're saying, look, I still struggle with this. I still feel attracted to the same sex, but I will live the rest of my life celibate if I have to. I will not give in to the desires of my flesh. I will crucify my flesh. Those people, how dare we reject those people? How dare we look at those people and say, no, you can't be attracted to the same sex and be a Christian. No, God forbid. Just like you can be a Christian and struggle with addiction, just like you can be a Christian and struggle with lying or any other sin, the same way you can be a Christian and struggle with same-sex attraction. Struggling with this internal thing does not make Jesus love you any less. The key is to call them to give their heart to Jesus and then trust Jesus to handle their heart, to ultimately come in and move in them. But the problem is The church has closed our door to them. We need to pray and seek God and repent as the church for rejecting people that Jesus died for. We don't accept sin, but we don't reject sinners. So with that, I'm going to move into the spoiler section of this. So if you haven't seen the movie, go watch the movie, come back to the video. So this is your warning, about to go into spoilers. There are two scenes and one thing that's not really a scene, but it's something about the movie that really stuck out to me. One of those scenes was the baptism scene. So in the movie, there's a scene where Kathy, which is Greg Laurie's girlfriend, and Greg Laurie, they go to get baptized at Pirates Cove in California. And in that scene, Greg Laurie is a little apprehensive. He hadn't actually gotten saved at this point. He's just there. People are getting baptized and he's trying to figure out what's going on. Kathy's given her life to Jesus. Kathy goes into the water. She gets baptized. She comes out. And after she comes out, he says, how was it? And she looks at him and says, you'll see. So he walks into the water, walks up to Lonnie Frisbee, and Lonnie says, I've been praying for you. Have you made a decision? Have you decided? Have you decided to follow Jesus? And he says, I don't know. And Lonnie's like, would you like to decide right now? And Greg Laurie says yes, and he prays and God saves him, and he immediately gets baptized by Lonnie Frisbee. And he goes under the water, but when they do it, it doesn't just show him go under the water and come right back up like it, real baptism. The way they visualize this is that when he goes under the water, it's almost like he has a vision. Now, I'm not sure in real life if he had a vision or if this is just the way they symbolized what was happening spiritually. But he goes under the water, and then in the movie, it shows him like he's just drowning, like his body's just going lifeless, and he's sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Now, in real life, he's up there at the shore, and Lonnie has just dipped him and is still holding him, about to pull him back up. But in the way it visualizes it, his body is just floating downwards. And he looks up and he sees the light above him shining through the top of the water, and he takes his hands and he opens his hands as if he's saying, I surrender, my life is yours. I'm not me anymore. I die. As he does that, he looks up and there's a light, and he reaches his hand up and he darts right back to the light. And then you see Lonnie lifting him out of the water. The reason that scene is so powerful to me is because it symbolizes, or it shows in visual form, what baptism actually is about. It's about a death to yourself. Baptism symbolically is you being buried with Christ in baptism and raised to new life in Jesus. That's what baptism symbolizes. You're going into the waters like you're going into the grave, and you die. Your old man dies. I had an encounter in baptism one time where I got baptized. I was actually in a creek and I got baptized. And when I came out of the water, my wife was there. It was an incredible moment. And as I came out of the water, I looked, and it's almost like I had a vision where I saw my own body floating around the creek curves around, and I saw my own body floating around the curve and just floating away. And it was just a vision from the Lord showing what had just happened to me, that in that moment, my body, my old man, that thing in me died. It was gone. It was buried. I'm a new person. That encounter in baptism was incredible. And that scene meant so much to me because it reminded me of that encounter I had when I got baptized in that creek. It's very important to understand that salvation is not, hey, I got saved, I said a prayer, I get out of hell now, and I love Jesus, and okay, good. Salvation is a death to yourself. Salvation is, I die, Jesus lives through me now. I'm a new creation. So that's very, 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 very important. That does not mean that at salvation you're perfect and now Christ lives through me and my old flesh is dead. It means that I have committed to dying daily to my flesh and letting Jesus live through me. So until I get my glorified body, I still battle this flesh. So if you battle flesh, if you're saved, if you love Jesus and you've given him your life, but you still battle issues of the flesh, that's okay, as long as you're battling it. As long as you're not giving into it, as long as you recognize that man is dead and I will not give into it no matter what I feel. I don't walk by my feelings. I don't give into that. It is when we do that that you know you have the fruit of repentance in letting the new life of Jesus live through you. The second scene that really had an impact on me, towards the end of the movie, there's a scene where Chuck Smith, played by Kelsey Grammer, his daughter comes and sits down with him and talks to him. And she says something very interesting. And maybe this hit me probably as a father. This scene really hit me. In this movie, you can kind of see at the beginning, she's kind of fed up with the fake religiosity of the church. She just thinks the whole thing's pointless and pretty much fake, is the way she kind of viewed it at the beginning of the movie. But then her dad opens up the church to the hippies. And she sits down with him at the end and she says, I was about to walk away from Christianity. I was about to be done with the whole thing. But then she says, but when I saw you open your heart to these people, when you opened yourself up and the decision, your yes to God, you're saying yes to what God was doing and not shutting it down because it was different or because these were the rejects. But when you said yes, it affirmed her in faith, in her faith. She was impacted by her father's yes. That she is a Christian because her father said yes. That she didn't walk away from the faith because her father said yes. And I think this is so important. Your yes to what God is doing affects an entire generation that comes after you. And that hit me. My yes to God, my yes to following Jesus, my yes to following him, come what may, whatever it looks like, whatever it sounds like, my yes to whatever he's doing that I will follow. That yes impacts my children. And it's an incredible reality for you. Your yes does not impact you alone. Your yes does not impact just the people around you alone right now. Your yes impacts generations. The third thing that really impacted me, that one of the people in the movie is an actor who plays an addicted Vietnam War vet who's in a wheelchair. And in encountering Jesus in the movie, he gets set free from his addiction. They baptize him, and in that moment, he loses all desire for drugs. He even tells a reporter in the movie, oh no, all the desires just went away. And the reporter's like, that doesn't make any sense. And he said, I know it doesn't make sense, but that's what happened. What's incredible is that the actor who plays that character is Sean Weiss, and I might be saying his last name wrong, Weiss, W-E-I-S-S. But Sean is best known for his role in The Mighty Ducks. He was the goalie in The Mighty Ducks, Goldberg, the goalie from The Mighty Ducks when he was a child. He had some roles in Boy Meets World and some other shows back in that time frame. And what's incredible is back in 2020, he had been struggling with addiction in real life. He had been struggling with addiction to meth. And so he was a meth addict. He became homeless. He lost everything. He had nothing. He had no finances. He was broken, and he hit his lowest point in 2020. And he broke into a home and broke into someone's garage actually and broke into their car, gets arrested. He had been arrested multiple times before that, and he gets arrested in that time, and finally through some prayer and some other people decided to get his life right. And so he goes to rehab. He gets sober, and again, this was in 2020. So he gets sober. He's just past 2 years sober. He ends up getting saved. And on the set of the Jesus Revolution movie, the real Greg Laurie, the real pastor Greg Laurie, was on set and actually had a conversation with him and then ended up baptizing him in real life while they were there on the set. So it's not just he gets baptized in the movie and it's a scene. This really happened, and for him, it's incredible. So with that being said, I think that's incredible, and that really touched me. Just that story is really touching. There's 3 things that stuck out to me about the movie. I highly encourage you to go watch the movie if you have not already. Try to go see it in theaters, support the movie. Let Hollywood see that this is the kind of content that we want to see in theaters, and they'll make more. So I love it. So I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope you got something out of it. If you haven't seen the movie, go see it. And until next time.